Whenever you make a sound in a normal room, it echoes back. That is just physics. Sound travels, hits a surface, and returns. The room confirms that the sound was real, but there is a psychological version of this that most people have never heard of. When a child reaches out emotionally, not always in words, sometimes just in a look, a cry, a reaching of the hands, they need something to echo back. A face that changes, a voice that says, I see you, a presence that confirms. You are real, what you feel is real, and it matters. When that echo comes back consistently, the child builds something essential. They learn that their inner world exists, that it has a name, that it is worth noticing. When nothing echoes back, when the sound simply disappears into silence, the child does not conclude that the room is at fault. Children do not think that way, they conclude that the sound was not worth echoing. And that is where it begins, part 1. The trauma that leaves no marks. Psychology spent decades focused on trauma that was visible. A car crash, an assault, a disaster with a clear before and after. Something you could point to and say, that is where it happened. That is what caused this, but a significant amount of human suffering does not work that way. It was not caused by something that happened, it was caused by something that consistently did not happen. No yelling, no violence, no obvious crisis, the house was still standing. The parents were often there. From the outside, it may not have looked like anything at all. Nobody is going to write a memoir about the birthday where everyone forgot, or the time they cried in their room for an hour and no one came, or the way their mother's face stayed blank every time they tried to say something that mattered. These things do not feel like trauma. You cannot explain them to someone without feeling like you are being dramatic. But they do leave marks, quiet ones, persistent ones. Psychologists call it childhood emotional neglect, or CEN. It is defined not by what occurred, but by what consistently did not. The attunement that was absent, the mirroring that never came. The echo the room never returned. It has left an entire category of suffering without a name, because from the outside, it may not look like anything happened at all. Part 2. How emotional mirroring shapes the developing brain to understand why the absence of emotional response causes lasting damage. You have to understand what emotional mirroring actually does developmentally. Children are not born with the ability to understand their own inner states. They do not arrive knowing what sadness is, what fear is, what it means when their chest tightens or their eyes fill. They learn this, and the way they learn it is through someone reflecting it back to them. A caregiver who says, "You look sad right now, is that right?" is doing something profound. They are teaching the child that internal states exist, that they are nameable, that they matter enough to be witnessed. Through thousands of these small moments, the child builds what developmental psychologists call emotional literacy, the capacity to identify, name, and work with their own failings. They also build something even more fundamental, the sense that their interior world is real and worth paying attention to. This is not a soft developmental luxury. Research shows it is foundational. Neurobiologist Daniel Siegel's work shows that caregivers literally help build the neural architecture for emotional awareness. When mirroring is chronically absent, those pathways develop incompletely, not because anything was damaged, but because the relational experience that was supposed to build them was never there. Part 3. What grows in the silence? The ignored child adapts. Children always adapt, reshaping around whatever environment they are given. The adaptation is precise and logical. If feelings do not produce a response, feelings are not useful. If reaching out leads to nothing, reaching out is inefficient. So the child learns to turn away from their interior world rather than toward it. To function, to perform competence while the interior world goes quiet. By adulthood, this looks like self-sufficiency, independence, emotional stability. All the things praised in adult life, but underneath the competence is a person who genuinely does not know how they feel. Psychologists call this alexithymia, the difficulty identifying and describing one's own emotional states. It is not numbness exactly. It is more like the instruments that were supposed to read the interior climate were never fully calibrated. There is weather happening, but the gauges were never installed to measure it clearly. Research links childhood emotional neglect directly to alexithymia in adulthood. A 2024 scoping review of 25 studies confirmed that emotional neglect, including the absence of mirroring and validation, consistently produces significant emotion regulation difficulties that persist into adult life. Part 4. What the IGNORED child looks like as an adult, many adults who experienced emotional neglect do not identify as traumatized. They appear high-functioning, competent, independent, often impressive. They have built lives that work, careers, relationships, responsibilities they manage with apparent ease. But internally, they may experience things that they have never quite been able to explain. A difficulty identifying what they feel, not "I do not have feelings," more like, "I know something is happening, but I cannot name it." A vague sense of being disconnected from their own experience, as if watching it from a slight distance rather than living inside it. A discomfort with receiving care. When someone is warm toward them, genuinely warm, present, attentive, something in them does not quite know what to do with it. It feels foreign, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes almost suspicious. Because warmth was not a regular feature of the emotional landscape they were formed in. A persistent sense that something is missing, not depression exactly. Not a specific grief, just a low-level awareness of a gap. An emptiness that does not have a clear address, a difficulty asking for help. The message received in childhood was that needs were not particularly relevant. The act of reaching out and receiving nothing is a lesson the nervous system does not forget. And often a profound confusion about why any of this is happening. Because nothing terrible happened, the house was standing, the parents were there. No dramatic event to point to, and so the suffering feels illegitimate. Something to keep quiet about, which is, in the deepest sense, exactly what was learned. Part 5. The way back healing does not require reconstructing the past or confronting adults who may never be capable of giving the acknowledgement you deserved. It begins with something quieter, learning to witness yourself. The thing absent in childhood was someone who paid attention to your interior experience and reflected it back. The repair is learning to do that for yourself, to pause when something is happening inside you and ask, "What is this?" Not to fix it, not to judge it, just to notice. To name it, even imprecisely, to treat it as information worth receiving. This sounds simple. For people who grew up in rooms that did not echo, it is genuinely difficult. The impulse is always to stay functional, to redirect outward, to not bother with what is happening inside. But the interior experience trained to go quiet is still there. Still generating signals, still asking to be witnessed. The room may not have echoed back then, but that does not mean the sound was not worth hearing. Outro. If you grew up in a room that did not echo, you learned something about yourself that was not true. You learned that your feelings were not worth reflecting. That your inner world did not register. That reaching out led to nothing, so reaching out was not worth doing. None of that was about you, it was about the room, and the room was wrong. You are allowed to unlearn what the silence taught you. You are allowed to start paying attention to the interior experience that spent years being trained to stay quiet. You are allowed to find the people and the spaces that echo back, not because you finally did something to deserve it, but because you always deserved it. The sound was always worth hearing. If this video described your childhood, or if it gave language to something you have been carrying without a name, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Leave a comment below. What part of this resonated most with you? I read every single one. Subscribe for new psychology content every week. Until next time, the room may not have echoed, but you are still worth hearing.